Welcome to this session. Sally has been a tutor and colleague for many years. Seems like almost my entire life I've been working with Sally. She has created a lot of the Delta course, a lot of the Delta materials, particularly when Delta went modular and we were made online components. Sally's been responsible for creating a lot of that, well, probably most of it. And yeah, I think I'll just pass over to Sally then, without further ado.
And I have to unmute myself. It's lovely to see so many familiar faces. And those of you who know me may realize my speech isn't great today. So what I've done is record some bits of this in advance, and then I'm going to chat to you in between those. What I'm talking about is a feedback system I adapted to use with our Module 2 tutors. And we tried this for the first time ever last December, and I was enormously pleased with it, and now I want to use it again. So what I've got are 3 short sections. The first section is why, and the second section, and then talk to you for a moment, and then the second section tells you exactly what it is and what we did, how it worked, gives you some examples from it, and then the tiny bit at the end gives you what did I learn and how do we want to use it in future. So it was just one thing we did to solve a problem at a time, but I liked it, so I'm showing it to you because I'm hoping some of you might either be able to use things from it or give me more ideas of what to do with it. So I'm going to share my screen to play you the first bit, explaining why I wanted to use this. When I first started working as a Delta tutor, you were expected to do the individual standardizations in Frontier, and then you uploaded them into the system, and they were checked back. In fact, I think before that, I even did 1 or 2 where you went to a face-to-face group meeting. But then for quite a long time, centres were expected to keep our own internal tutor standardized, and there was a range of lessons and materials available on Frontier to help with that. And I know they've moved the CETA standardization stuff to CETA, so I guess that eventually the Delta materials will end up there too. I built one of the lessons from what was available in the Frontier set into our internal tutoring training program. I also used some of our own house materials, but I wanted to have some of the Cambridge things in there. And also I wanted the new tutors to realize it was there if they wanted to do some more on their own. But during that period, Cambridge only seemed to release new lessons about every 18 months or 2 years. And even then, it was actually quite easy to miss the fact that one had been released. The last announcement I was aware of was for the assessors. They were talking about a new lesson in 2017, but it wasn't accessible in the main room we'd been given access to. And no one else who was a tutor but not an assessor could access it either. So that summer in ITI, those of us who were on the intensive did one on an in-house recording in that first week on the intensive, where it's all manageable before it gets madly intensive. And of course, that's not the only thing that standardizes people, because there is double marking going on all the time. And of course, we do verbal mark to the requirements on courses, but that's only the background. It's rarely a lesson. I mean, people talk through a lesson, but you're not in it with them. And I do encourage anyone who's not comfortable about a grade to ask for a second eye if it's something they're worried about. And newer tutors tend to do this more often, which is a good thing, which is reassuring. But of course, everyone gets busy. Everyone ends up doing things under a lot more pressure when they're on intensive, particularly. And every time we run an intensive, I have the idea that if there's a little bit of slack in the system, I won't take so many trainees and I'll do some live double marking on lessons instead. And every time the course ends up full and busy and this stuff. And that was okay, that was enough. I wasn't worrying about this while our staffing was very stable. But then in 2017, 2018, we had staff turnover, partly because of people moving their lives, but also partly because numbers were coming back up. We had had a turbulent year or two here in Turkey politically, but by 2018 things were picking up again and we were rolling on bigger courses. And we ended up with 3 people on the Module 2 team who only had a year or so of Delta tutor experience. And of these newer people, some were actively asking for support and feedback, and some weren't. But I think the thing that worries me about that is most often I find in life and in teaching and in tutoring, it's often the people who most need it who aren't asking. I'd like to be able to say I always know exactly what all my tutors are doing, but in reality, you can't micromanage them. You have to, the organization can't afford for you to read everything everyone writes. So you have to be using people you trust to do it well. And also, while we all try to do our best all of the time, can any of us say that we haven't looked back at a report sometimes and had an ouch moment about something we said or haven't said? It's hard to be perfect all the time. When you're scanning things to check reports and summaries match, or to double mark, or to put 5 C's together, you see flashes of great feedback. But you also see moments that probably didn't help. And that's true in everyone's work, their own included. My problem, the reason I wanted to do this for developmental purposes for all of us, but I was also starting to notice a bit more description that was helpful in some of the feedback coming from 1 or 2 people. And all of us at any time can do with reminders and new insights into what we and others are doing. So that was the prompt for trying to do this or do something new in a new way to internally standardize all of us. What I would like to ask now, before I tell you exactly how we did it and how it worked, and give you examples, is, am I missing something? Since 2015 or 16, individually, I have only had access to lessons I can choose to standardize myself on within Fronto. I can put tutors in there. I can send them to do that. What do other centers do about keeping, I mean, we have therefore gone on and developed these other ways of working on this, but what are the people doing? I know if you're an assessor, you do get lessons more regularly. Is anyone in the center where there are enough of you for this to be happening? And if you're freelance and not an assessor, how do you standardize yourselves? How do you get some kind of feedback on this? Does anyone ever actually tell you they like your work, or it's good, or it's not good enough? That was an open question. Do please unmute yourself and answer, anybody.
Can I say something? In our experience, we observe diagnostic lessons together, and it works as standardization between the tutors. We observe all diagnostics together, me and my co-tutor. Mm-hmm.
Do you talk through afterwards the extent to which had it been assessed?
Yes.
That's a nice trick. Maybe we could do that as well. Has anyone else? What are other people doing?
We've done it before where we've all gone away and watched the lesson, looked at the background essay, the lesson plan, then we've all got together and discussed what we'd noted down. And I think I found that probably the most useful standardization I'd done before, actually getting together in the room and sitting down and talking about
That's what we were
your thing.
doing. Yeah, that's what we did in 2017. We started using our own videos once we found we weren't accessing the front, or there weren't any new ones in front. But as you say, everyone watching the same thing. Anyone doing anything different? Does anyone regularly, I hadn't thought of doing it with developmental lessons, Olga. Does anyone in a position in the center to have 2 people go in? Because, I mean, timing of it is part of the problem. It's quite hard.
We did in our very small Delta because we started running it just before the COVID situation, and then we were granted permission to go on, and we ended up with 2 candidates and 4 tutors. So we could easily observe the lessons in pairs, and it was also partly because we were afraid if one of us loses access to the internet, the other one could still be there. But it's turned out to be very helpful.
Yeah, that would be fabulous. I keep saying if we have a course where there's enough space, I'll do it. But how often? Well, as you said, occasionally the numbers do drop, but not for such a good reason. Okay, so this was my problem. I felt we needed more of it in some way, and this was the solution I came up with. Given that it is not easy, I have 10 people on staff who can do module 2, sorry, not on staff, 10 people who work regularly with our institution who can do module 2, a few of whom are on staff full time. But this is the problem. Not everyone is on every course. Getting people together in a room becomes hard. In fact, I've got 8 of them to join in with this. I'm going to play once again in a second segment. In December, I decided I wanted to try 360-degree feedback with the Module 2 team. I'd actually been reading about it for the company in general, for a more overall human resources approach, but I could see elements of it I could adapt to this activity, this exercise. 360-degree feedback is a system where everyone contributes feedback on everyone else. So here, if you're the feedback receiver, you self-evaluate, but you also get information from line managers, from peers, and from subordinates. And when you read about it being used in general management in a company that's not necessarily anything to do with teaching, there are a variety of pluses and minuses. Some of them seem to apply overall, also in every ELT, and some of them seem not to apply in that context. So I'll show you what I mean. In that, the benefits, the major benefit is that you're getting information from a variety of different perspectives. And it can give you new ways of looking at what you're doing. The other thing is it can also help teams bond. They actually have to look at everyone else's work. They become more aware of how well other people are doing things. I think we can all end up isolated on a day-to-day basis without realizing it. The drawbacks that apply both in general and in ELT is that you have to be reasonably confident people are going to come in on this actively. It takes time to provide feedback on everyone. And the other thing is that there's data collection and analysis to be done. Now for us, because at this point it was a team of only about 8, it's not too much data, but within a big company, you have to have an HR department coordinating all the information. Because you end up with that thing about there is a lot of feedback for the individual involved. But again, that thing about the person who most needs it is the one who's least likely to be able to spend the time picking out key points. So you need someone guiding it, managing it, and that usually means in a big company within the HR department. And there are more criticisms from a general business point of view that I think don't apply to the tutors at all. One of which is they say people can't give this kind of feedback when they don't understand each other's jobs. But if everyone's coming from a teaching awards background, then that's not applicable. And the other major criticism within general business is that many of the people involved are not, in fact, in a situation where they regularly have to evaluate things objectively. Again, that just doesn't apply to teaching awards tutors who should be doing exactly that. That's a large part of our job. So we have lessons we can use that have been recorded on past courses. On intensives, you often offer teachers a chance to be filmed as a sort of quid pro quo. They get a copy of themselves teaching a lesson. It's interesting for them developmentally. It can help in lots of ways. And if it turns out to be a good lesson, often they put a lot of time and effort in on the LSA lesson, then they can have it as part of a portfolio that they can use when looking for jobs. Well, I get access to film of people teaching. I can then use in various ways on our courses. For example, we run online module 2 courses. Some of those people are quite isolated. It's difficult for them to do peer observation. So we use some of these lessons for that. And I can also use it, as I did here, to work with tutors and extract things we need in different ways. The students and permissions are relatively easy because they're free fast students. So we do tell them politely we're going to film. They don't have to stay, but they're free. They're not paying, so it's their choice. We are going to film. So I chose something the year previously that only I had watched. I sent out a message to explain my thinking and invited the team to train in. Everyone who was actively involved in courses did. We had 1 or 2 people who do occasionally do module 2 for us who didn't manage to find the time, but I might persuade them as well in the future round. My instructions were, here's a link to a lesson on video, here is a link to the materials, and they should mark the background and lesson as though this were a trainee they were working with, and then send the Delta 5A to me. I would then anonymize everything, and then I'd ask them to give feedback on reports from a couple of the other tutors. Nobody would know whose was whose. I gave them a week to do the first Delta 5A. I sent gentle reminders after a few days, kept my fingers crossed. Heavily encouraged. The freelancers who work on module 1 and module 3 as well are all used to standardizing on every round of everything anyway. But actually more than module 2 people do module 2 and not module 1 and 3 and the salaried. And that being salaried also means they have less control over their own time. But the newest tutors were very keen as they wanted feedback on whether what they were doing was okay or not. And in fact, by extending the deadline only really a very little bit, I didn't actually get back the core 8 people who were all involved. So I allocated 3, let me show you the system. I allocated 3 reports then onto each tutor to comment on. And I suggested a praise, question, suggestion form. And I came up with code so everything could be anonymous. I had done it as well, so there were 8 reports in there. As it was going on, I was getting reports in, commentaries back in. I also decided that if I wanted to steer this a bit, I should join in with feedback as well. And I was a bit worried that the feedback was coming was quite varied. So I wanted to add a more consistent stream to the back of that. Possibly I'm just a bit too controlling. And about looking back at my work tracking for that month, the whole thing, setting up, anonymizing, compiling, writing my own more detailed feedback and sending it all back out, I tracked that as 11 hours of work, which actually isn't as bad as you might have guessed. So when I had done that, then I was able to send things back, compile and send things back to tutors. What I ended up with, to give you an idea of what some of that looked like. So this first slide is an extract from a fairly solid middle of the road feedback from a tutor on someone else's report, doing exactly what I asked. And I'm going to leave it on screen for a moment so you actually have time to read quickly through. So this is, oops, an example of the kind of thing. This is one, and they got 3 back. Some people did a bit more than this, some people did a bit less. Now, I'm hoping I've left you enough time to read that, but if I haven't, we will be posting videos later, so it's something you can come back to. But I am going to say, so that was one example. But I'm going to show you another, and I'm going to show you another. Well, one thing that was interesting is one or two of the newer tutors were asking very specific questions about their own practice, but it actually helped in a way. It pointed up things in the report in quite an interesting way. So this was one example of exactly that. So in a way, this person has covered much of the same points, but they put them directly as questions to me, but I left questions in everyone's reports because I thought most of them were really useful and pushed you to think about what you were doing. So every person who'd written a report then got back, as part of their feedback, 3 of these from 3 different tutors. Again, all anonymized, no one knew who was writing to who. And I also went through everyone's report and wrote something short for each of the 10 sections. I'm going to show you an example of that was for one tutor, but it's not for all 10 sections. Obviously, it's just, I think it was for sections 7 and 8. Yes, it is. And I did this before I read the short tutor summary. So I was trying to praise, but also trying to be quite directive where I felt things could usefully be a little bit different, especially for those who are rather newer at the game. And having done all of that, I then came up with a list of things arising. So things that have come up in more than one report. And we have house policy. I have documents that say do this, remember this. But from this, it was clear that it would be good to emphasize some of these things are already on that list. I think I ended up with 8 points. And again, I've brought an extract on this slide that's got 3 of those points. And then finally, I went through the whole thing, amalgamating what everyone had said. So there was a kind of neutral that this is what we read. It was a very borderline, both background and lessons. So the actual grades, I think were still disputed even at the end, but the areas she needed to work on were absolutely clear. So this was my summary of what people said about 7, for example. So a tutor then got back after all that one document only for themselves with these headings. It had the feedback from peers, person A, person B, person C, and then had feedback from me. It then had the 8 general points that we would highlight or add into our normal document, and then the summary of what was coming to all in the reports. And so that's what we did and how we did it. I'm going to stop this here now to see if you have any questions about the mechanics of that. And then there's one last little bit I've recorded about what I learned, but it's much shorter, but about what I learned from doing it and what I want to, where I want to take it from here. One, have I managed to explain that reasonably clearly, what the process was? Yeah, no one. And then what I was hoping, if you can say yes or ask anything that was unclear about what we did, and then I could say what we had learned from doing it and what I want to do with it next. As a process, have I managed to make that clear? Or are there any questions? There's one thumb. Okay, all right. Okay, in one way, it looked all of that. And when we put the recordings up, I'll make sure I've put in PowerPoints that are completely legible. But it looks enormously elaborate. And the kind of structuring of it was quite elaborate. But I think the outcomes of it were really, really worthwhile. The tutors that were involved, the majority of them were very enthusiastic, and nobody actually said they hated it. Some people launched themselves in with more enthusiasm than others, and more than half of them actually bothered to get in touch after all and said they actually found it very valuable. I learned, as you almost always do from doing anything I found new, that my instructions could have been clearer, and I should have given more examples from the beginning. For example, I hadn't said whether they should or whether they shouldn't comment on other people's background comments. As a centre, we say don't put comments in the plan, but if comments will help you be more, give more insight, you can put some in-text comments in the background as well as the report. So some people had even gone on to comment on those and other people's marking. I hadn't made it clear if they should, but they shouldn't. The other thing that I had done was I should have given the example of quite how long the feedback I wanted was. Gemma is asking where I got the lesson from. It was from one of our intensives on the previous summer. It was one that I had assessed and we had recorded, as I say, on the intensives. I say to them, if you would like to be recorded, you can be. It may be useful. In fact, the people who are recorded often find it very, very useful. Watching yourself back is incredibly useful. And as I say, the permission thing works because it's kind of, if you're recording, you're happy with it, you've got something for your portfolio, and then I can use it in courses. In this case, it's given me a lot of things you've been able to use in different ways. The other tutors had never seen the lesson. I'd seen it about considerable time earlier. And certainly the newer tutors were enormously reassured. That was the biggest thing that came back from them. I think when people first start, they think that, as with many things, they think there's like one fixed, correct answer out there. And the whole exercise made them see that people with many years of experience, it's not that they're saying different things, but they're saying the same thing, perhaps in slightly different styles or in slightly different ways. And it seemed to make nobody was wildly out of line. And it gave me a huge insight into who was doing what well, and some interesting insights into some hidden stars. One person turned out to be extremely good at giving feedback to peers. Although it was quite time consuming, it was worthwhile. The thing I would like to do next, it's not something you can do frequently, but something I would like to do once a year. The other thing that I would like now to adapt it to, because people found that peer-to-peer interaction so useful, seeing what others have done, and having the time to extract the useful bits from that. The other area I find we get the most pushback from participants about inconsistency is draft marking. On early LSAs, we're allowed to give support. We have policy about, roughly speaking, how much support you should be giving. But I think if we did this activity again before the next time we run a course, a busy course, where I use one draft from somebody and ask everyone to do it blind in this way again, and then comment on what each other is doing. I think that could bring out, again, it will help me make guidance documents for tutors clearer, because I'll be able to see how differently people are or are not approaching it. It's also something I see less of. I do see 5As go past for admin purposes, but I don't see draft marking go past so much. To have that out there more publicly would help people get a feel for what others are doing and get a feel for what we're trying to aim at better, I hope. So that is what we did, and that's how I would like to use it next. I'm kind of hoping you guys will now say, oh, that's interesting, yes, we could use it in that way, or oh, that sounds like something else we have done. Please do just unmute yourself and tip in, because that was what I had to say. If you can see any other ways this could be exploited. Hello, Gemma.
Hello. I was just thinking, I think I would also be interested to know how candidates feel as well, and because I think there are sort of wildly different approaches to giving feedback, not in terms of what we say, but different centres in terms of the volume of feedback they give. And I'd be interested to know what candidates find useful, because ultimately it is for them, and perhaps different styles, or look into how they react to the feedback and how they interpret it as well. Is that anything you have investigated or
no, but it's
tried?
a really interesting question. One, you probably have the same thing. I often end up only fielding that feedback when I have an annoyed candidate, and that's almost always someone who hasn't passed the lesson and doesn't really get why. And then one go-to thing can be, well, other tutors are helping more, is a very common. And I very much take the policy line of, I'm sure it's just different approach. And I mean, I think it almost certainly is different approaches, and sometimes people just aren't ready to be able to take. But it would be a really interesting project to try and work out, to get some kind of perspective on how they see things. And what it is, as you say, they should be getting and are getting when they see the gap. And to try and do that across the board, rather than just dealing with the ones who are annoyed afterwards. So it would give a better feel for, I'm sure others have exactly the same thing. You end up reacting to dealing with things, which gives you a slightly skewed picture of, because the happy bunnies have all just gone off with their feedback. Somebody said you could use it for CETA as well. Would you do that in-house? Do you feel yourself, as I don't work on our CETAs, but if you're working on CETAs, do you feel you're standardized in-house enough? Would you like a bit more? Could that be done? Would that be a way of...
I think it was my comments. I think absolutely, why not? We did our in-house standardization for CETA trainers, but we used the Cambridge materials. We didn't produce our own materials, but it would be much more interesting, I think, for the local context, also to record a lesson and discuss it in in a step-by-step procedure as you described. What we did, we just simply gathered together and we discussed what our assessment was for this lesson, for this assignment, and we just shared. So that's what we did in the past. But your approach seems much more systematic and much better organized, I would say. So just step by step.
I think that the reason I was thinking about noticing, you know, how that thing about having the time to notice, because I found on 1 and 3, when you've got new people marking, they get very excited when they realize that we're actually encouraging. If you see something in another tutor's feedback that you like, use it. It's not just, if it's well phrased or useful, just scoop it up and adopt it as a way of saying that. That thing about getting people to focus in on what another tutor is saying in that way, and hoping that will make them notice things they can lift and use and take with them. Because when you're first doing it, I think it's quite hard to articulate some of what you can sense needs to be said. So, and sometimes when you're reading other tutors' feedback, then you see, okay, that says it so neatly, that would work. So pushing them into a context where they have to read someone else's, I thought would increase the chance of them taking that. And I think it did. I still find I borrow from colleagues all the time. We want them to be doing that.
Yeah. I was going to say, I mean, I really agree with you. And I look at other people's comments and think, what a great phrase. And as a freelancer, I think I have tried to do it with centres I've been working in for Delta, not so much for self-serve, but not as systematically as you've done it, and using the Cambridge standardization. So I think it'd be much better to have like a recorded lesson. But I think it'd be really useful for freelancers, because there is that time when you don't really know somebody very well and you don't know their approach or how they write things, and you don't often have a chance to sit down and have a discussion. So this would be really good, and doing it maybe before for CETA and for Delta, actually. Yeah.
And that's an interesting comment, because it might be something we could open to freelancers as well, but because how on earth do you get yourself this kind of feedback if you're moving from centre to centre? It must be much harder.
Yeah, what I do is often I sort of like swap ideas with the person I'm working with, and we sort of like look at each other's 5A forms and go, oh yeah, okay, that's great. And we sort of double check very quickly, but often, as you say, you don't have time.
Yeah.
You don't have time. Yeah.
This was about trying to make it work at a deeper level just once, or maybe just once a year. It's not something you can do a lot.
Yes,
no.
But it'd be great to know before you actually start. It'd be really interesting to do. Yeah. Well, I really like that.
Good. Well, the other thing about using our own lesson, I mean, I built some of the frontier lessons into our tutoring training package, because I thought I should, because of course those are the Cambridge agreed grades, and the lesson we all watched for this activity it was just that I'd graded it, and I chose a very borderline lesson on purpose, because some lessons are, and I think there's the hard ones. But also the ones that were in front of were very much of a muchness. They very carefully go through the staged grammar, or the staged lexis, and all the students are mic'd, so they can't let them do anything interesting. Because it's in that kind of context, they can't send them off to a work on Google Slides or something like that, because they're filming. So they can't do the things that are actually happening in our free classes. So it was nice to have it of a lesson of the kind we actually do watch on the intensive quite often.
Yeah. Great.
Okay. Has anyone? Oh, there is something in the chat box. Elna, do you want to talk about different ways of feedback? You're in the chat box, Elna.
Actually, it was more a case of having no time, and that was kind of something that happened on the first intensive course I worked on. There were just so many things that I had to do that I then eventually once asked someone if it would be okay to actually just do the feedback on the draft of the BE on WhatsApp. And the person said, yes, okay. And so I did it. And the person came back to me and said, absolutely great. Because then the person, you can also, I think you can sometimes be a lot clearer when you're actually verbalizing what you mean, than kind of writing things, because also then you want to kind of maybe be a little bit more formal, etc. And then maybe your meaning doesn't really come out. And so that's why I kind of sometimes, if a candidate says yes, I use WhatsApp. And what's also great is that you can then go back, and they can also go back and constantly listen to the messages and kind of, it's almost in us having kind of face-to-face feedback a little bit.
Did you, hang on, did you do it live or did you record it for them?
No. So you you're looking at your BE, and as you go, you say, oh, so the introduction, oh, you might want to add this. Remember to do this. Think about this. You want to maybe think about this, and then you kind of just, you, as you would if you were sitting down with the candidate and talking through the BE with someone, yeah.
Oh no, but you don't have to type it.
And then you don't have to type it, yes. Which is really, really great, because sometimes the fingers get really tired.
Tell me about it. Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. So if we do this for draft feedback, we'll have to have options. Maybe we get people to do a written one, and another time get them to do a verbal one. Okay.
Can I say something, Sally?
Please.
I mean, one of the problems that I have with the Delta feedback is getting a balance between what is the aim of the feedback? Is the aim of the feedback to help them develop? So it's kind of like a process, so they improve their background, in which case the WhatsApp thing would work very well, because you would kind of say, oh, you could do this, or you could change that, or you need to do. So it's kind of, the aim is to help, it's draft feedback to help them develop. But then you have to, the actual form, the Delta 5A form, is very much about the assessment. So to what extent have you met or not met the criteria? So you end up writing very different things on the form and the actual BE itself. And it's getting that balance between whether you're writing in terms of how well has the criteria been met, in which case it's a very different document from this is the advice I would give you in order to help you improve this. And that, I think that's partly to do with the actual form itself, because in CETA, you've got a blank piece of paper and you give them feedback, and this is what's good about it, this is weak, and this is what you need to do. And you can kind of, you have the flexibility just to focus on the development side of it. But with the Delta 5A form, you're kind of pushed into referring to the criteria. And getting that balance between the two, I find quite challenging.
I have always seen it as supposed to be developmental, so that I'm meant to be mentioning criteria, but I'm meant to be helping them get to this. I wonder if some of that conflict comes from the fact that you assess as well.
Yes, so the 3 internal Delta 5 forms, in theory, should be very different from the LSA 4. But when I'm not so sure that they are really. I spend a lot of my time saying, this has been met, that's been met, which I probably wouldn't even mention on a, you know, if it was just oral feedback, I wouldn't need to refer to the criteria because they're not kind of relevant to the strengths or weaknesses of the lesson.
But the form can be the same. I don't have it with Module 2, but with Module 3, I have to shift between being a draft marker and a Cambridge marker. And I find those completely different processes. So because I don't assess in Module 2, I only ever see the 5A as I have to come up with a grade, but what I'm supposed to be doing in the writing to the candidate is telling them how they can make this lesson better and feed things from this lesson into their future lessons.
Yeah.
Ah.
Which would be easier for me to do if it was a blank piece of paper, to be honest, than going through this criteria. So it's, yeah, getting the balance between to what extent am I saying whether they've met the criteria or not, or giving them advice about how they can improve it. Don't know if anyone else.
Both.
And we always do them both, because to a certain extent, obviously you have to say that you've met this and you click met or not met or whatever. But then don't you then also add ideas of, as Sally says, of what the person could do in order to next time when it's writing a BE. So basically you do both, don't you?
Richard is also saying in the chat box that one of the problems is that putting it all in. There you go. He will say it for himself.
Richard agrees with me. There we are, Richard.
Yeah, no, totally agree. There's just far too many criteria, and actually developmental feedback can get lost. And I find myself writing too much. And the trainees have said to me before that they haven't got time, especially on an intensive course that I'm starting on Monday, for example. In 6 weeks, when they're doing a module 2, they can't process that much text. They kind of need to know exactly what they need to do in order to meet the criteria, but hopefully get some development out of it as well. So I totally agree with what you're saying, James, and in terms of the criteria.
That is, I clearly remember a failing candidate about 2 years ago, and I was saying, but in the report, I haven't got time to read those.
I've been told by some that they only read the bottom bit, you know, which is where you put down the strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the important bit. Yeah.
Spend all those hours typing it up.
So therefore, prioritizing, seeing whether people have prioritized or not was one of the things. Indeed, we had one tutor who everyone said, look, it's fabulous, but there's an awful lot there. So that feedback came through as well. So things like that came out of that process a bit too. If no one else has anything, oh, there's another chat comment. Okay, it was just a that's true comment. Do you think we have covered, extracted the goodness from that? I think we may have done.
Yes, great. Thank you very much, Sally.
Thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
I hope it was interesting. Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.